Okay, let's unpack this. I want you to close your eyes just for a second and imagine that you are 9 years old.
Right. Just a kid.
Yeah, exactly. You're 9. And you are holding your mother's hand, like gripping it as tightly as your small fingers possibly can.
Hmm.
But you aren't walking through a sunlit park, You aren't walking to school.
No, definitely not.
You are running for your absolute life through these labyrinthine streets of this sprawling, towering, futuristic metropolis called Centropolis.
Which is just a terrifying image right off the bat.
Oh, it's a nightmare. Your lungs are burning, your legs are aching, the concrete is just blurring beneath your feet. But the physical exhaustion isn't even the worst part.
It's the noise, right?
Yes, the sheer deafening noise,
Yeah.
because behind you, spilling out of the alleyways and flooding these massive avenues, is a mob.
And they aren't just like an angry crowd protesting.
No, they are murderous. They are actively hunting you. And the absolute most terrifying detail of all, you can actually hear their hatred.
Literally hear it.
Yeah. Literally. Not just their shouts echoing off the buildings, but their actual unfiltered thoughts. You can feel the psychic weight of their disgust, their bloodlust.
Just boring directly into your 9-year-old brain.
Exactly. You can hear it because you and your mother, well, you're different. You have these fine golden tendrils woven into your hair.
Which, in this world, is a death sentence.
100%. In this society, those tendrils mean you are a monster. It means you are a Slan. And government policy dictates, without any exception or trial, that you must be exterminated on sight.
It's just an incredibly brutal, viscerally overwhelming way to pull a reader into a fictional world.
It really is.
Like, there is absolutely no gentle ramp up here. There's no leisurely world building where we get to, I don't know, admire the architecture of Centropolis before the plot kicks in.
Oh, ain't no tourist guide.
Exactly. You are dropped immediately, without a parachute, into the desperate bleeding edge of an active genocide.
Yeah. And to really grasp the weight of this opening, we need to set up the mission for today's deep dive,
Which is a big one.
It is. We're looking at a deeply influential classic of science fiction, Slan, or the full title, Slan: The Evolution of a Superhuman Minority.
Right. Written and published in the early 1940s.
Which is key context.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
When you look at the geopolitical climate of that exact era, the rise of totalitarian regimes in Europe, the systematic dehumanization of specific populations, the parallels to the plight of Jews during the Nazi era are just stark, intentional, and inescapable.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff.
It is. The author is basically using the framework of pulp science fiction to process these incomprehensible atrocities making headlines across the globe.
Right. And just to be clear for you, the listener, we are looking at this text today through a strictly impartial, analytical lens.
Exactly.
We have this huge stack of literary analysis, plot breakdowns, thematic studies, and scientific critiques. And we're not endorsing the political extremes of the era. We're just impartially reporting on how the text functions as an allegory.
Right, looking at where its mechanics fail and why it ultimately reshaped the entire genre.
Because let's put all our cards on the table right up front.
Oh boy, here we go.
This book, it features some incredibly stilted dialogue.
It really does.
And some completely outdated evolutionary science. Plus a few narrative choices that will seriously make a modern reader want to pull their hair out.
Yeah, it's highly flawed.
But somehow, despite all that, it broke absolute ground. So our mission today is to figure out how this messy piece of media inspired countless later works, established tropes we still see in massive blockbuster franchises today, and delivered profound allegories about prejudice and the corrupting nature of power.
It's the ultimate paradox of classic foundational media.
How so?
Well, a work can be structurally messy, scientifically inaccurate, and yet still be historically and culturally vital.
Right. That makes sense.
And to understand that vitality, we really have to start right back in that terrifying alleyway in Centropolis with that 9-year-old boy.
Jommy Cross.
Yes, because that inciting incident sets a relentless, unforgiving pace. We have young Jommy and his mother. They are Slans.
Which we should explain what that means, biologically speaking.
Right. So they are an evolved human race. Visually, they're identified by those distinct golden tendrils in their hair.
Which aren't just, like, decorative.
Right. No, not at all. They are the literal biological antenna that grant them telepathy. Wow. But the mutation doesn't stop at reading minds. Slans also possess drastically superior intelligence, superhuman physical strength, superhuman speed, and this is my favorite part, what the text literally describes as nerves of steel.
Wait, nerves of steel? Like, literally?
Yeah, it's enhanced physiological resilience to trauma and stress.
I mean, that sounds like the ultimate evolutionary jackpot.
It really does.
If you're going to be a persecuted minority, having superhuman speed, strength, and telepathy seems like a pretty good defense mechanism.
You would think so.
But all those incredible biological advantages do not save Jami's mother in that opening scene.
No, they really don't.
The mob is simply too large, you know? The hatred is just too vast. So they catch her. And she is murdered right there in the streets of Centropolis while her son watches.
It's just devastating.
It is. But right before she dies, she manages to pass on a charge to Jami. It's this incredibly heavy, almost impossibly cruel dying wish to place on a kid. She tells him that he has to survive the streets, he has to grow into his physical and intellectual power, and ultimately he has to confront the human dictator.
You're gray.
Right, Kier Gray. He has to destroy him so that the Slans can finally exist without being hunted.
A massive burden for a 9-year-old.
Seriously. And Jami, tapping into those superhuman physical abilities out of pure survival instinct, manages to actually outrun the adults and vanish into the shadows of the city.
What's fascinating here is how the author takes the classic pulp hero archetype and forces it into a framework of systemic, inescapable oppression.
Yeah, starting with a public lynching really sets a tone.
Exactly. Starting the story in media res like that does more than just spike the reader's adrenaline. It instantly establishes the socio-political reality of this world.
It's not just good guy versus bad guy.
Right. This isn't a story about a hero fighting a singular villain. It's a story about a persecuted race fighting a society-wide mandate for their extinction.
Wow. Yeah.
But look at how Jami is positioned. He is the quintessential pulp protagonist. He's an orphan child, burdened with a massive, world-altering destiny, literally from page 1.
It's a huge setup.
It is. It immediately presents us with a narrative of extreme exceptionalism. Jami isn't just trying to find his next meal and survive the winter. He is biologically and narratively destined to topple a global dictatorship.
Okay, I see the mechanics of that, but I want to push back on how that exceptionalism actually plays out in the text.
Right, go for it.
Because we recognize this trope, right? The tragic loss of a parent, the realization of special abilities, the vow to tear down a corrupt system. I mean, it's the blueprint for a dozen major superheroes.
Oh, totally. Batman, Spider-Man, you name it.
Right. But let's look at the human perspective in this specific universe. The propaganda driving this mob violence is based on the human belief that Slans are essentially machine creations.
Right. They see them as heartless.
Exactly. Humans genuinely believe that Slans possess a cold, ruthless disregard for regular human life. So if we look at Jami's escape from that mob, I mean, he's 9 years old.
Yeah.
And he is effortlessly outrunning, outmaneuvering, and logically calculating his escape from dozens of fully grown adults to a terrified human who has been fed a steady diet of state-sponsored propaganda. Doesn't Jami's superhuman survival actually prove that the propaganda is right? Doesn't it justify their terror?
Oh, you are hitting on the exact brilliant psychological tension that makes the first act so compelling.
Really? So the book actually wrestles with that?
Yes. To the human observers, his escape is utterly terrifying. It completely confirms their confirmation bias.
Wow.
When they look at Jami fleeing, they don't see a traumatized, grieving 9-year-old boy whose heart is just breaking. They don't hear his internal terror.
They just see the machine.
Exactly. They just see a biological machine operating with impossible speed and cold, calculating precision, exactly as the dictator's propaganda warned them it would.
That is so tragic.
It really is.
Yeah.
The narrative is wrestling with the brutal reality that exceptionalism, even when it's the only thing keeping you alive, is inherently alienating.
Right, because his survival mechanism isolates him further.
Precisely. Jami's the victim of a horrific, unprovoked hate crime, but his biological method of surviving that crime visually and physically reinforces the exact prejudice used against his people.
It's a self-feeding cycle.
A completely tragic one. To survive the monsters, he basically has to perform the role of the monster they believe him to be.
That framing completely changes the tone of his escape for me. He doesn't get to just be a victim. He has to immediately become the nightmare just to see the next day.
Exactly.
And his survival forces him to make a deeply compromised choice. Because he can't go to an orphanage, right? He can't run to the police.
No, the police would kill him instantly.
Right. He has to completely disappear from official society. So he has to hide in the absolute drugs of the city that just murdered his mother. He goes underground.
Down into the criminal underworld.
Yeah. And this transition into the underworld sets up an entirely different dynamic. We move from the adrenaline of the chase to this deeply uncomfortable, morally compromised situation involving a human captor named Granny.
Yes, the narrative completely shifts here from survival horror to a strange, dark, Dickensian underworld.
Like Oliver Twist, but with mind reading.
Basically, yeah. Following his escape, Jami doesn't find like a noble mentor.
Hmm.
He falls into the hands of an elderly human woman known only as Granny.
And she is not a sweet old lady.
Definitely not. She is described as a hardened, drunken former actress who is essentially sunk to the very bottom of Centropolis's criminal ecosystem.
Hmm.
And she's incredibly shrewd. She immediately realizes what she has stumbled upon. She knows he is a Slan.
Because of the tendrils.
Exactly. But rather than turning him over to Keir Gray's authorities for what would undoubtedly be a massive financial bounty, she decides to exploit him for long-term gain.
Wow.
Yeah. She uses his telepathy, his superior intellect, and his physical dexterity to turn him into her personal master thief.
That's wild.
She weaponizes his Slan traits to build a criminal enterprise for herself, having him locate hidden valuables and navigate the dangerous criminal underworld on her behalf.
And what blows my mind is that Jami stays with her for years.
Yeah, he really grows up there.
Right, we watch him grow up in this environment. As he matures, his Slan biology kicks into overdrive. His intellectual powers just grow exponentially.
He becomes a genius.
An absolute unparalleled genius operating in the shadows. He begins secretly accessing human technology, building hidden laboratories, advancing his own scientific knowledge.
Right under Granny's nose.
Yeah. We even learn that he has inherited his father's scientific legacy, including, and this is such a classic Golden Age sci-fi detail, a devastating atomic ray gun that his father invented.
Just casually inheriting a WMD.
Exactly. But his father was a pacifist who refused to use it against humanity, even as humanity hunted him.
Which is a stark contrast to what Jami might do.
Right. So you have Jami sitting on a literal weapon of mass destruction, possessing an intellect that outstrips the greatest human scientists, and he's using all of it to essentially pickpockets for an alcoholic former actress.
It's a bizarre setup.
It is. But while he is operating in this criminal twilight zone, he makes a discovery that completely shatters the fundamental premise of the world he thought he lived in.
Oh, this is a huge turning point.
He discovers the tendrilless Slans.
Yes. This is where the world building shifts from a simple binary to a really complex sociological study.
Right, because before this, it was just humans versus Slans.
Exactly, oppressor versus oppressed.
Yeah.
But Jami discovers a vast, highly organized, completely hidden network of a second faction of Slans.
The tendrilless ones.
Right. These are the tendrilless Slans. As the name implies, they lack the golden tendrils. And because the tendrils are the biological mechanism for telepathy, they cannot read minds.
Okay, so they're blind in that sense.
Telepathically blind, yeah. However, they retain the vastly superior intelligence, the enhanced physical strength, and the nerves of steel of the true Slans.
So they're still superhuman.
Very much so. But they aren't hiding in the gutters and alleys like Jami. They are highly technologically advanced. They operate massive secret factories.
Wait, really? Factories?
Yeah, and they have essentially infiltrated and taken secret control of the globe's entire air transportation network.
Oh, wow. So they have real infrastructure.
They wield immense economic and logistical power right under the humans' noses. But the most critical detail about the tendrilless Slans is their relationship with the true tendrilled Slans.
Which is not good.
Now, it is defined by a deep, violent, mutual hatred.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because you take that classic straightforward us versus them narrative, and you completely fracture the oppressed group.
You really do.
Suddenly, the persecuted minority hates a subfaction of their own people just as much, if not more, than they hate the humans who are hunting them both.
It introduces a massive level of political complexity.
It really does. But honestly, the moral landscape was already getting incredibly murky just looking at Jami's personal choices.
Oh, for sure.
When we talk about his life with Granny, modern readers have pointed out a deeply uncomfortable reality about how Jami survives.
Right. It's not pretty.
No. He doesn't just passively serve her out of fear. As his powers mature, he actively begins using his telepathy, specifically his ability to project thoughts and enact mind control, to manipulate Granny and other humans around him.
He essentially gaslights them telepathically.
Yeah, he hijacks their free will to secure his own safety, his resources, and his dominance in their criminal dynamic.
It introduces a profound, unsettling moral ambiguity that the narrative doesn't always seem to fully realize it's exploring.
Yeah, the author almost seems to brush past the horror of it.
Exactly. We, as the audience, are implicitly asked to root for Jami because his mother was murdered and his people are the victims of state-sponsored genocide. He holds the ultimate victim card.
Mm-hmm.
But as his agency increases, his methodology becomes undeniably coercive and tyrannical on a micro level.
She's overriding their brains.
Right. He is overriding the neurological autonomy of a human being. Now, one could argue that Granny is a deeply flawed, exploitative character who initially enslaved a traumatized child.
Sure, she's awful.
But Jami's casual use of mind control to pacify and direct her forces the reader into a very difficult ethical corner. Does trauma justify the removal of another being's free will?
Wait, that is exactly the question we have to ask. Because if Jami is mind-controlling a vulnerable, alcoholic old woman, even if she is a terrible person who exploited him, does he permanently lose the moral high ground?
It's a huge debate in the fandom.
I mean, think back to what we discussed earlier. The humans justify their genocide by claiming Slans are dangerous, unfeeling machines. When you see the supposed hero of the story casually reaching into a human brain and rewriting their intentions just to make his day-to-day life a little easier, it violently shifts your perspective.
It really validates the human fear.
Exactly. It makes the human propaganda seem a lot less like irrational bigotry and a lot more like a completely rational, justified survival instinct against an apex predator that can literally hijack your consciousness.
Yeah.
I mean, if a tiger is in your house, you don't care if the tiger has a sad backstory. You are terrified of what it can do to you.
You are piercing right to the core of one of the major thematic pillars of this narrative, the corrupting nature of power and specifically the costs associated with it.
Yeah.
The text wrestles intensely with the ethics of superhuman superiority. What exactly does a biologically superior race owe to a weaker humanity?
Do they owe them anything?
That's the question. Is the moral authority of the oppressed completely invalidated the moment they utilize the tools of subjugation? Because if your primary mechanism for defense involves the total eradication of another sentient being's autonomy, you have to ask whether you are a liberator or simply a new, more efficient flavor of tyrants.
Wow. Yeah, you become the thing you ate.
Exactly. The author is demonstrating that power, even when it is wielded by someone who has suffered immensely, has an inherently alienating and corrupting effect.
And that idea of corruption and adaptation ties perfectly into the sociology of the tendrillist Slans. Like, why do they hate the true Slans so much? Why fracture the resistance?
It's a brilliant, if bleak, sociological extrapolation. Marginalized groups often fracture based on their proximity to the dominant culture's norms.
Meaning how well they fit in.
Right. The tendrilless lands lack the visible physical marker of difference, the golden tendrils. Therefore, they can pass as human much more easily.
Oh, that makes sense.
They leverage that visual assimilation to infiltrate the human economy, specifically logistics and air transport, which grants them immense invisible power. But they deeply resent the true Slans, because the true Slans' visible differences and their telepathy constantly draw the violent ire of the human mobs and the dictator's security forces.
So the true Slans are blowing their cover.
Exactly. The tendrilists view the true Slans as a liability, a threat to their own careful assimilation. It's a sharp, painful commentary on how oppressed communities can internalize the hatred of their oppressors,
Right.
ultimately pleasing and violently turning on one another in a desperate bid to prove they are, quote, one of the good ones to the dominant class.
That is a staggering observation. The tendrilists hide in plain sight, hoarding power, while the true Slans are hunted like animals in the streets.
It's survival of the most assimilated.
Yeah, they've essentially adopted the oppressor's mindset to protect their own comfort. It's a heavy concept.
It really is.
Now, we've spent all this time in the dirt, right? We've been down in the criminal underworld with Jami, navigating these secret factions and moral compromises. But a story of this scale can't just stay in the shadows.
No, it has to expand.
Exactly. The narrative structure demands that we look at the other side of the coin. We have to examine the human power structure that is driving this entire conflict.
The dictator's palace.
Yes, we need to leave the dregs of Centropolis and move to the absolute highest seat of power, the palace of the dictator Keir Grey. Because, incredibly, the most secure human fortress on the planet is hiding a true Slan of its own.
Precisely. The narrative executes a hard pivot here, introducing parallel story threads that will eventually collide.
Right.
While Jami is learning the harsh, pragmatic lessons of street survival, the text introduces us to Kathleen Layton.
The other Slan.
Yes, Kathleen is a true Slan. She possesses the golden tendrils, the telepathy, the enhanced intelligence, but her life experience is the complete polar antithesis of Jami's.
Because she's rich.
Well, sort of. She did not watch her mother get lynched. She was not forced to hide in the criminal underworld. Instead, she has been raised since infancy in the very center of the human empire, deep inside Keir Gray's palace.
So she's safe.
Not exactly. She hasn't been hunted, she's been allowed to live, but she lives essentially as a captive pet.
Oh, that's so messed up.
The dictator has kept her alive specifically to study her, to observe Slan development up close in a controlled environment.
I cannot imagine a more psychologically torturous existence. I mean, you are a biological telepath, which means you can hear the thoughts of everyone around you.
Right, you can't turn it off.
And you are living in a palace surrounded by government officials and guards who have literally signed the death warrants of your entire species.
The anxiety would be unbearable.
You are sleeping down the hall from the men who are actively orchestrating the genocide of people who look exactly like you. The sheer mental fortitude required just to not lose your mind in that environment is staggering.
It really is.
And Kathleen is in constant, immediate physical danger, not just from the abstract idea of human hatred, but from a very specific man.
John Petty.
Right, John Petty. Petty is Keir Gray's chief of security. He absolutely loathes the fact that Kathleen is breathing his air. He wants her dead.
Desperately.
But his ambition goes way beyond killing a captive Slan. Petty is actively leading a massive, heavily fortified conspiracy within the human cabinet to assassinate Keir Gray and take the dictatorship for himself.
The layers of palace intrigue here are dense and really Machiavellian.
Yeah.
You have John Petty utilizing his position as the head of security to organize this quiet revolt, slowly gathering the loyalty of the cabinet against the dictator.
Like a slow coup.
Exactly. But Keir Gray is not a passive target. He is presented throughout the text as an incredibly formidable, intellectually terrifying opponent.
He's playing 4D chess.
He really is. He is completely aware of the shifting loyalties. He outmaneuvers the entire human cabinet with chilling precision. He uncovers the plot, and he ruthlessly, systematically executes every single one of the conspirators.
Just wipes them out.
All of them, except for John Petty.
What's
Gray deliberately spares the architect of the assassination attempt, keeping Petty alive and firmly in his position as security chief, citing Petty's usefulness.
Okay, stop right there. I have to interject because this makes absolutely zero logical sense to me on a human level.
I know, it sounds crazy.
Right. Imagine working for a boss, like a CEO, a manager, a dictator, whatever, and that boss knows with absolute, verifiable, 100% certainty that you just spent the last 6 months organizing a hostile takeover and attempting to literally murder him. And instead of firing you, or in this high-stakes sci-fi world, executing you, he just smiles, slaughters all your co-conspirators to send a message, and then says, "I'll see you at the security briefing on Monday, John."
Yeah, it's wild.
Why on earth does Keir Gray keep the snake in his house? What does this reveal about his psychology? Because to me, that level of extreme pragmatism crosses the line into complete sociopathy.
It seems counterintuitive, but if we connect this to the bigger picture, if we analyze it through the lens of pure political realism, think Machiavelli's The Prince, it reveals the exact psychological architecture of why Keir Gray holds absolute power.
Okay, break that down for me.
Well, he operates entirely outside the boundaries of normal emotional reaction. He does not let pride or anger dictate his personnel choices.
He's a machine himself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
John Petty, because he is so overtly ambitious and hateful, is a known quantity. Gray knows exactly how Petty thinks. He knows exactly what Petty desires, power and the death of Slans.
Right.
And because Petty's desires are so singular, his actions are entirely predictable. To a mastermind like Gray, an enemy you understand completely, an enemy whose every move you can anticipate, is vastly more valuable than an unknown, unseen enemy waiting in the wings to take his place.
Keep your friends close and your enemies closer.
Exactly. By keeping Petty close, Gray controls the opposition. This is the defining hallmark of the inscrutable dictator archetype. Gray's motivations remain utterly opaque to everyone around him. In fact, one of the most mechanically significant details in the entire novel is that Keir Gray's mind is inexplicably closed to Slan telepathy.
Wait, really? They can't read him?
No. Even Kathleen, who lives in his private quarters, cannot penetrate his thoughts. To a telepathic species, He is an impenetrable, terrifying fortress of the human being.
Which makes him the ultimate evolutionary puzzle. If your entire biological advantage is reading minds, a man with a naturally blocked mind isn't just a political enemy. He is your natural biological predator.
He's the one thing they can't adapt to.
He is the one thing you cannot anticipate. And seeing Keir Gray operate really highlights the stark contrast between the two Slans in this story.
Jommy and Kathleen.
Right. You have Jommy out in the streets, getting his hands dirty, building atomic weapons, learning the harsh, unforgiving realities of survival and compromise. He is an active agent of chaos. Meanwhile, you have Kathleen, who is fundamentally written as a damsel in distress. She's trapped in this gilded cage, waiting to see if the dictator will protect her or if the security chief will murder her.
It's very passive.
It is. Critics of the book point out that she essentially exists in the narrative primarily to serve as a motivator and eventually a love interest for Jommy. It's a very passive, reactive survival strategy compared to Jommy's proactive aggression.
It is entirely passive, and it is a glaring reflection of the gender politics of the science fiction publishing industry in the early 1940s.
Oh, absolutely.
Jommy, the male protagonist, is granted total agency. He achieves technological mastery, he navigates a dangerous world, he makes complex moral choices, and he drives the plot forward.
He's the hero doing hero things.
Right. Kathleen, the female counterpart, is confined to a domestic sphere, albeit a palace. She is constantly observed, scrutinized, and placed in a state of perpetual passive peril.
She just waits for things to happen to her.
Exactly. Her survival doesn't depend on her own ingenuity or superhuman abilities. It depends entirely on the whims and the power struggles of the dominant human men around her.
The dictator and the security chief.
Right. She survives only because Gray's bizarre protection outweighs Petty's restrained malice. But if we look closely, Gray's opaque motivations and his ruthless, emotionless political maneuvering in the palace actually serve as a dark thematic mirror to Jommy's own developing ruthlessness on the streets.
Oh, I like that comparison.
Both of these men, the human dictator at the top of the world and the Slan savior at the bottom of it, are slowly learning to view the people around them not as human beings, but as disposable pieces on a chessboard.
That is a deeply chilling parallel to draw. The prophesied savior of the oppressed is starting to operate with the exact same cold, calculating methodology as the dictator he is sworn to destroy.
Right, they're becoming reflections of each other.
And obviously, the narrative tension demands that these two parallel paths, the hidden street urchin growing into a superhuman weapon and the captive palace pet navigating lethal politics, inevitably collide.
They have to.
Right. Jommy's dying mother gave him an explicit mission to confront Keir Gray. Kathleen is living in Gray's house. The collision is geographically inevitable, which brings us to the climax of the novel. And look, we have to talk about how this book fundamentally breaks it down in its final act, because this is where the execution makes some incredibly frustrating, arguably disastrous narrative choices.
Yeah. The structural transition into the final act is notoriously jarring.
It's a mess.
After years of meticulous preparation, hiding, and building his strength, Jommy finally claims his father's atomic weapon.
He's ready for war.
He emerges fully realized as a Slan powerhouse, intellectually and physically. He follows a complex trail of clues that leads him out of Centropolis to a secret remote Slan hideout.
Okay.
And it is here that he finally meets Kathleen Layton, who has managed to escape the palace. Right. The two destined Slans, representing the two halves of the Slan experience, are finally united. It is framed as a monumental moment. But the reunion is shockingly, almost comically brief.
Oh, no.
Within moments of them meeting and establishing a connection, Kathleen is murdered.
Just like that.
Just like that. John Petty, the security chief who has been hunting her the entire novel, finally tracks her down and kills her violently.
I remember reading the breakdown of this specific sequence and just feeling this immense, overwhelming wave of frustration.
It's infuriating.
Let's call it exactly what it is in modern literary terms. This is a textbook, egregious example of fridging.
Absolutely.
For anyone listening who might not be deep into comic book critique, fridging, or women in refrigerators is a critical trope identified by the brilliant comic book writer Gail Simone back in the late 90s.
It's a very famous concept now.
Right. She noticed a pervasive pattern where female characters were brutally killed, maimed, or depowered for the sole exclusive purpose of serving as a traumatic motivational tool for the male protagonist to push him into the final act.
Just fuel for his anger.
Exactly. And that is exactly precisely what happens to Kathleen. She spends the entire book trapped in a palace. She finally gets a moment of freedom. She meets the hero, and she is instantly slaughtered just to make Johnny really, really angry so he has an excuse to start blowing things up.
Literary analysts universally critique this exact sequence. It is a cheap shock and awe tactic that modern criticism rightly labels as highly problematic and narratively lazy.
Lazy is the perfect word for it.
Kathleen's death provides absolutely no resolution to her own narrative arc. She doesn't die saving anyone. She doesn't die making a stand.
Right, she just gets shot.
She merely dies to provide the emotional fuel for Jami's final rage-induced assault. It is an incredibly cynical use of a character who, up until that moment, represented a completely different, valuable perspective on the Slan experience.
The assimilated captive experience.
Exactly. And what immediately follows her death completely shatters the established tone of the book.
Oh boy, here we go.
Fueled entirely by his grief and rage, Jami uses his advanced technology to hijack a spaceship, leaves the Earth entirely, and travels to Mars.
Wait, what?
Yeah, Mars.
I have to express sheer, unadulterated frustration at the pacing and the logic here. We have spent hundreds of pages in the claustrophobic, grimy alleys of Centropolis and the tense, whispering hallways of the dictator's palace.
Very grounded political thriller.
Yes, we have been meticulously building up this intricate, earthbound political thriller about systemic prejudice, secret underground transport networks, and the threat of atomic weapons. And then suddenly, literally out of nowhere, the story straps a rocket to its back and blasts off into outer space. Jami goes to a fully terraformed, habitable Mars.
Just quite the pivot.
It feels like the author accidentally dropped the manuscript for the sequel into the middle of the climax. How does a writer who built such an intricate political puzzle so spectacularly fail to stick the landing?
It is a common documented pitfall in early classic science fiction. The author, driven by a restless imagination, has created a knot of political, biological, and moral complexities so incredibly tight that untangling it through conventional, grounded character action becomes almost mathematically impossible within the page count.
He wrote himself into a corner.
Exactly. So rather than resolving the political thriller on Earth, the author violently escalates the setting to a cosmic scale and relies heavily on exposition to tie up the loose ends. On a purely thematic level, you can argue that Jami's journey to Mars is a search for ultimate identity and otherness. He is leaving the homeworld that violently rejected him to find the ultimate hidden truth of his species among the stars.
Okay, thematically I get it, but mechanically?
Mechanically, the execution is universally criticized. It is incredibly rushed and completely anticlimactic. Because when Jami finally has his ultimate destined confrontation with Keir Gray, who also conveniently ends up embroiled in this sudden interplanetary climax.
Right, of course he's on Mars too.
The resolution is not achieved through character growth or a satisfying ideological debate or even a tactical battle. Yeah. It is achieved through a massive, multi-page info dump.
Right. The dreaded info dump.
It's a big one.
The author essentially hits the pause button on the entire narrative momentum. The characters stop moving, and one character just stands there and verbally monologues the answers to every single mystery the book has set up.
It's all just read out loud to the audience.
Yeah. And during this massive speech, Jami discovers an astonishing secret that abruptly, magically recontextualizes the entire human-Slan conflict and neatly prevents an interplanetary war from breaking out.
The big twist.
Now, we aren't going to dance around this. We are doing a deep dive. We need to look at the mechanics of this secret. The grand revelation, the big twist that resolves the book, is that Keir Gray, the ruthless human dictator who has been orchestrating the genocide of the Slans, is actually a Slan himself.
Yes. The ultimate twist is that the oppressor is secretly a member of the oppressed class.
It's wild.
Gray reveals that he and a shadow council of other true Slans have secretly been running the human government for generations.
Wait, so the humans were never in charge?
Nope. The entire human-led genocide, the brutal persecution in the streets, is revealed to be a carefully managed, horrifying sociological experiment.
An experiment. That's his excuse.
Yeah. Gray argues that humanity is not biologically ready to accept the Slans, and if the Slans simply took over, humans would eventually destroy them through sheer numbers and attrition.
Okay.
So Gray has been playing the villain, keeping the true Slans oppressed and in hiding, waiting for humanity to naturally evolve, and for the Slans to reach a critical mass of technological superiority where they can reveal themselves safely.
Oh my God.
He reveals that the tendrilless Slans are actually a flawed mutation. an evolutionary dead end that needs to be managed. The entire book's conflict is recontextualized as a staged evolutionary crucible directed by the dictator.
Which is, wow, okay. It's a massive sweeping concept. But mechanically, relying on a villain's monologue to suddenly explain that the genocide was actually a benevolent protection program is a massive letdown after such a visceral, grounded opening.
Yeah, the tone shifts completely.
It completely breaks the cardinal rule of storytelling, you know?
Right.
Show, don't tell. You don't spend a whole book showing the horror of prejudice only to have a guy give a TED Talk at the end explaining why the prejudice was actually good for them.
Precisely. The heavy reliance on an info dump suggests that the conceptual premise simply outgrew the author's ability to plot it naturally.
He bit off more than he could chew.
He really did.
Oh.
But even though the climax stumbles incredibly badly in its execution, we have to recognize the ambition of what that astonishing secret attempts to do conceptually. It attempts to completely dismantle and invert the us versus them binary that the novel has spent hundreds of pages building. It forces Jami and the reader to realize that the rigid divisions between human, true Slan and tendrilless Slan are not absolute,
It blurs all the lines.
and that the historical narrative they've all been violently operating under is a fabricated, manipulated construct. It's an incredibly bold conceptual swing, trying to reframe a story about racism into a story about evolutionary stewardship, even if the execution is deeply flawed and morally questionable.
A bold conceptual swing that face plants right at the finish line.
Yeah, that's a fair assessment.
I think that perfectly transitions us past analyzing the plot itself. We've seen the traumatized kid in the streets, we've dissected the psychology of the dictator in the palace, we've suffered through the blatant fridging of the female lead, and we've analyzed the Mars info dump and the big twist.
We've covered the whole journey.
Now, we need to zoom out. We need to evaluate the actual science presented in the book, the major enduring themes, and ultimately answer the fundamental question of whether this piece of media actually holds up for a modern listener today.
The big question.
Let's look at the science fiction elements first, because reading this with a modern lens reveals a really fascinating, contradictory, mixed bag of terrifying accuracy and total speculative nonsense.
It absolutely is a paradox of scientific foresight. Let's start with the most striking, undeniable accuracy in the text: the inclusion and detailed mechanics of atomic weapons.
Right, Jami's father's gun.
Exactly. Early in the book, Jami inherits a devastating atomic ray gun, a weapon powered by atomic energy. What makes this detail extraordinary and historically vital is that this novel was conceived and written before the atomic bomb was successfully tested.
That is mind-blowing.
It was written before the general public had any awareness of the Manhattan Project or the true destructive capabilities of splitting the atom.
He just guessed it.
Well, he accurately anticipated not just the physical mechanics of atomic energy in warfare, but its psychological function as the ultimate deterrent.
Like mutually assured destruction.
Exactly. A weapon so absolute and terrible that its creator, Jami's father, morally refused to use it even to save his own life. That is a stunning, chilling piece of prescient science fiction. It proves the author was closely following theoretical physics and extrapolating its darkest sociological outcomes.
It really is incredible. To accurately predict the existential anxiety of the atomic age years before the age actually began shows incredible intellectual foresight.
It's prophetic almost.
But then we have to look at the rest of the science in the book. Telepathy is, of course, purely speculative.
Right, there's no real science there.
It's a fun narrative trope, but it is not grounded in any real-world neurobiology or electromagnetic physics. Then we have the sudden trip to Mars.
Oh, the Mars trip.
In this universe, Mars is a perfectly terraformed, completely habitable planet that you can just hijack a spaceship and fly to over a weekend in a fit of rage.
With no concern for atmospheric pressure or orbital mechanics.
None at all, just point and shoot. But perhaps the most egregious scientific failure of the entire novel is its fundamental depiction of genetic mutation and evolution. The biological science here is completely laughably outdated.
Yes, the evolutionary biology is fundamentally flawed. The novel treats human evolution like a sudden, spontaneous superpower injection, rather than a slow, generational adaptation to specific environmental pressures.
It's like comic book science.
It is.
Oh.
It uses the terminology of Darwinian natural selection, but applies the logic of an origin story. It actually leans closer to Lamarckian evolution.
What's that?
It's the discredited idea that an organism can pass on characteristics it acquired during its lifetime.
Okay.
Or it's simply spontaneous massive mutation.
Ugh.
In reality, A new, distinct species does not just pop up in a single generation, complete with golden telepathic tendrils, two hearts, and a perfectly optimized set of superhuman physical
Right.
traits.
Evolution is a messy trial and error process.
Exactly. Evolution is messy, slow, and full of dead ends. But while the specific biology is entirely outdated, the thematic application of that biological difference remains incredibly potent.
The themes really carry the whole thing.
Yeah, the themes of systemic persecution and the psychological nature of prejudice are the true, enduring engines of this narrative.
So what does this all mean? I want to pose this directly to you, the listener. We've just spent all this time breaking down a book where the dialogue is admittedly clunky.
Very clunky.
The evolutionary biology is essentially magic. The female lead exists solely to be murdered for man pain, and the grand finale is a guy reading a sociological encyclopedia entry out loud.
Not a glowing review.
Why should you care about this story today? Why have we dedicated an entire comprehensive deep dive to examining something that fails the test of time in terms of basic artistic merit?
This raises an important question about how we evaluate the history of media. We often fall into the trap of believing that a piece of art must be a flawless, timeless masterpiece to be worthy of our attention or study.
Right. If it's bad, we just ignore it.
But historical vitality is very different from artistic perfection. Slan is deeply, undeniably influential because of its restless imagination and its willingness to tackle massive sociological concepts.
It paved the way.
It did. It introduced the specific idea of a persecuted, biologically mutated telepathic minority. That exact trope would go on to be the foundational blueprint for massive cultural juggernauts like Marvel's X-Men.
Oh, wow. Yeah, mutants versus humans.
Exactly. Or the telepaths in Babylon 5 and countless other foundational texts of modern pop culture. It's a cultural keystone. It is the messy, flawed prototype that allowed the genre to mature.
It's the rough draft. Without this clunky, conceptually overloaded blueprint, we do not get the polished masterpieces that care later. It laid the groundwork for how we talk about bigotry, mutation, and systemic oppression in science fiction.
Exactly. But even more importantly than its influence on pop culture, it serves as a vital historical document of the psychological fears of its era.
Right, back to the 1940s context.
It was written in the dark shadow of rising European dictatorships and the terrifying dawn of the atomic age. When you read the passages about the humans fearing that Slans have a ruthless disregard for life,
Yeah.
you aren't just reading a sci-fi plot.
You're reading history.
You are reading an author actively wrestling with the fascist propaganda of the 1940s. You are seeing an exploration of how societies convince average citizens to commit horrific atrocities by systematically dehumanizing the other.
Which is still so relevant.
It is. It forces us, as modern readers, to examine our own contemporary prejudices, our own vulnerability to propaganda, and our own deeply ingrained willingness to believe the absolute worst about groups we do not understand or who are visually different from us.
That is the true value of the text. The value isn't in the prose. The value is in the uncomfortable cultural reflection it forces upon us.
Absolutely.
So to recap this incredible, complex journey we've been on today, we started with a hunted child, a 9-year-old boy running in sheer terror through the streets of Centropolis, surviving the trauma of a brutal public lynching.
An unforgettable opening.
We watched him navigate the morally ambiguous, deeply compromised waters of mind control and the criminal underworld, discovering hidden hierarchies and internalized hatred within his own people.
The whole tendrilist conflict.
Right. We contrasted his act of survival with the captive, tragic existence of Kathleen Leighton in the heart of a dictator's palace, surrounded by lethal, Machiavellian political intrigue.
And that devastating fridging.
And finally, we followed a rage-fueled, heavily flawed narrative climax to Mars that, despite its messy execution and bizarre twists, managed to introduce concepts that shaped the landscape of science fiction forever.
It is a profound testament to the power of a single resonant idea. The narrative execution may stumble, the science may fail, but the core conceptual premise, the struggle for survival, identity, and morality in a world that is structurally determined to eradicate you, endures.
It really sticks with you.
It reminds us that studying flawed works is absolutely essential. It allows us to trace the evolution of the stories we consume today, to see the raw, unpolished, often uncomfortable origins of the tropes we now take for granted on the big screen.
And it leaves us with so much heavy, complex material to think about. I want to leave you with a final, lingering thought, something for you to mull over long after this deep dive ends. We talked about evolution as a slow process.
Right.
But imagine if a spontaneous, radical evolution actually occurred tomorrow. Imagine a small, visually identifiable minority of humans suddenly developed undeniable, verifiable telepathic superiority over the rest of
That's
us.
out of nowhere.
Given everything we've discussed today about the human capacity for fear, our vulnerability to propaganda, and our desperate instinct for self-preservation, would our society's natural, immediate inclination toward violent persecution inadvertently force that new minority to become the exact ruthless monsters we are so desperate to protect ourselves from?
That's the real terror, isn't it?
It really is. Think back to that 9-year-old boy in the alleyway.
Yeah.
When the mob starts chasing, who really becomes the monster?